What experience of yours is so crazy that you don't tell people about it because they wouldn't believe you? When I was younger, I worked at a popular theme park in the UK as a ride assistant. One of the rides I worked on was the River Rapids. Two young Scots lads, who had obviously been drinking, got on, and it was clear that they were going to be a pain in the arse. As the raft comes towards the end, they were both running around the outsides of it. The raft hits the wall and they both fell in. This is near the lift section of the ride, which, if they'd been snagged, would have torn them up badly. I ran down and somehow managed to pull them both out. They were both swiftly escorted to the medical center, and I'm assuming off-park. The same day, after I finished work, I went to go and see a friend for a few hours, and on my way home I follow a car that is all over the place. The car hits a curb and flies onto its roof. I stop my car, run across, yank the doors open, and pull both the occupants out. The same two lads I'd pulled out of the water at work earlier in the day. Well, they're obviously just trying to die, and you keep messing up that plan. Watch this end up just like The Incredibles, where they end up suing him for continuing to save their life. I was on a train, and this train had one of those chains which you pull in case of an emergency, and it stops the train, and if you pull it for no reason, you can face up to 2 years in prison and a huge fine. So I was just sitting, and when I decided to get up to go to the washroom, I was kind of stuck, so I used the nearest thing to help me get up, and what I pulled was the chain. Suddenly the train stopped, and I was like, oh crap, here I go to the prison, when suddenly people start running out of the train. P.S. the train had no doors. You would understand if you know what an average local Indian train looks like. I don't know about other countries. And what I realized was that a compartment of the train was on fire. So that's how I survived from going to prison and accidentally saved the train. I told this story to a friend, but he would not believe me, so I just let it go. Yeah, like I get the whole rule of like no causing any false alarms like that, but I wonder if a rule like that will ever incentivize somebody if they accidentally pull it to just start a fire. I like watching wild birds at my work. I watched a young magpie steal bread off a raven. The magpie's family then attacked the young magpie, took the bread off and gave it back to the raven. They were bird yelling at the young bird, then called to the young magpie and kind of forced it to the front of the pack to the raven. The adult magpies gently pecked at the young magpie until it sung at the raven. Then the magpies all waddled away and went back to hunting for bugs. I feel like I watched some sort of family magpie discipline to prevent an interspecies bird war. Maybe Charlie wasn't making it all up. Maybe bird law is really a thing. I opened the fridge and a jar of mustard came falling down. It hit the ground and I already thought, great, now I have to clean all of it up. But I genuinely didn't hear it hitting the ground. When I looked down, there was nothing there. No glass shards, mustard, nothing. I looked around for a good 5 minutes, questioning my reality. Turns out it kind of repelled off the ground and landed in the wine shelf, next to the fridge, like 1.5 feet above the floor. Upright, standing, it straight up did a bottle flip off the floor. It dropped a solid 6 feet on hard ground and just bounced. Still questioning the laws of physics to this day. Man, why can't this happen every time something falls off the shelf? Once when I was 8, I was climbing out of the bathtub after showering. Since I was all wet, my mom wrapped me up in a towel, so my hands were wrapped as well. I ended up tripping over the edge of the bathtub and face planted onto the ground, where I just laid there kinda comatose for a second. So I tried to get up, blood flowing down my face from a cut in my head and nose, and my bucket of crabs nearby, since this was a seaside resort, toppled over and went all over me. And they were in like a blood frenzy or something because they pinched me all over, so I started rolling on the ground. My family just kinda stared at me. I bled from my nose for 3 hours after being rescued from the crabs, and got sent to the hospital, where my nose actually wasn't broken. My family refuses to acknowledge it ever happened, even though I have a hospital bracelet with that date. Oddest thing ever. Yeah, okay, it's not that I don't believe you, but it's just like, why do you need a big bucket of crabs in your bathroom? Back in high school a few years ago, I had a photography class with my best friend, and we went to NYC to take pictures for an assignment. We were walking through Times Square, and there's always people trying to hand out flyers or comedy club promos, or bus tours, etc. This pretty girl got our attention, and she was talking to us about a book. I can't remember the name. Anyway, she's explaining this book to us, and suddenly she's like, I have someone who can talk to you about this book in more detail. Come with me. And she grabbed my friend and I by the arm, and starts walking us somewhere down like 42 Avenue, if I remember correctly. It ends up being a Scientology church. At the time I had no idea about Scientology and was just curious what the heck was going on. So she walks us through the door and immediately a small group of people approaches us. She tells them we want to join and their eyes light up. One of the leaders, I guess, comes over and the girl basically hands off to him. He leads us down a hallway and says something along the lines of, "We have a special movie for you." So we're brought into a small theater, if you could call it that. Maybe like 20 chairs and a small screen. He says the video lasts about half an hour and leaves, closing the door behind him. After 2 seconds, my buddy and I finally go, WTF, and head for the door. Turns out it's locked. We looked around the room for any other door, but it was dark except for the light from the screen. I really did think we were gonna get gassed. The video was about how each of us all have untapped superpowers, and this was more or less an instructional video of how to activate them. It was so absurd. When the video ended, they opened the doors and asked us to fill out a contact form. Nope, we beelined it for the door and got out immediately. Headed to Midtown Comics to catch our breaths, and then went about our day. I've told people before, and they've been skeptical and dismissive by saying, well, why didn't you just get out immediately? Or why didn't you break free from the girl, etc. I don't know, in the moment I didn't feel threatened or scared. I wasn't even sure what was happening because it was so sudden and quick. It wasn't until we got in the theater that we both opened our eyes and went, dude, what is going on? So yeah, kidnap may be a strong word, but that was my one and only brush with Scientology. See, anytime I ever hear about people who are into Scientology, it's kind of on the same level as people who are into the flat earth. I can't really think of many times I've heard people say anything positive about Scientology. But yet, they still make billions of dollars, so there's definitely people out there. When I was a teenager, I almost got run over by Robert Pattinson in my hometown. It's a smaller city between Bruges and Ghent. He was driving a Mercedes, probably on his way from Brussels to the hotel he was staying at on the coast. I'm 100% sure it was him. He was in Brussels for a premiere of the last Twilight movie at the time. Only told my dad. So he wasn't driving the Batmobile? I guess that's kind of disappointing. So when I was 10 years old, I was walking my dog down the street with my father, and my dog decided to take a slow piss on the car wheel of a Mercedes-Benz. A couple minutes later, that exact Mercedes-Benz slowly drives past us, and then U-turns around, and slowly drives past us again. This time he opens his window and shouts "F you" to us multiple times without explanation. After cursing at us for a minute straight, he speeds off back into the neighborhood, so we just continue on our walk. As soon as we get back into our street, we see the man walking towards us and pull out a gun. He aims at us and shouts, "Your dog pee my wheel?" over and over again. Of course my dad gets very angry and shouts back at him, "Do you think this is the friggin' Wild West?" He then starts shooting at us, but misses completely, and then my dad sprints at him and manages to tackle him to the ground. I go and get my mother, and we call the police. Meanwhile, my dad still had the guy pinned down. The police come and take the guy away, and we find out that he was a big Chinese drug dealer in the area. So this is basically the story of how my dad took down a Chinese gangster whilst unarmed. You know, for being a drug lord, he doesn't sound very smart or coordinated. When I was a preteen, I was outside watching shooting stars. It was a time of year where you can see lots of comets fly by. It was the middle of the night, and I was laying in the grass just enjoying the stars and comets. My older stepsister had just gone inside to grab a drink. Out of nowhere, the entire sky lit up, bright blue for a nanosecond. All that was left when it faded was a blue streak across the sky, and what looked kinda like a ship at the front of the streak. I didn't know what I was seeing, but it looked like it was rotating slowly. It eventually disappeared, but the trail was still in the sky. Immediately, I rushed inside to try and get people to go out and see it, but by the time they got outside, it completely faded. Nobody believed me. I found out later it was just a SpaceX launch, but I thought I had seen a genuine UFO for years. I know I saw it, but I didn't tell anyone because it'd sound crazy. Oh, psh, all you saw was a rocket launch? Well, come back to me when you see an actual alien, alright? I saw a girl who contracted a rare African parasite shoot crack, causing tiny worms to crawl out of the hole in her arm and from the corners of her eyes. It happened. I'm sure it did. I saw the worms. She held one up and said, "See, I told you, this is what they look like." I threw it on the floor and burned it with a lighter. I wasn't even on drugs because I had a drug test for probation in the morning. It's like my own brain is trying to convince me it didn't happen, but I'm sure of it. Okay. Thanks for sharing. That's kind of gross. When I was 21, I was going through a really lost and stressful time in my life. I'm not religious and don't really believe in spirituality or the paranormal, but I kept having sleep paralysis episodes that seemed so real. The hallucinations, the panic, everything was very much real and right in front of me. An old lady who was my neighbor heard from my mother that this was happening to me, so she had me call this guy who apparently was like a guru with paranormal experiences like that. He basically told me to simply go through my room and every day before going to bed to tell whatever it was that was causing these episodes that it wasn't welcome and to go away. So I decided to humor him in hopes that it would make it stop, and after doing this 1 or 2 times, I wake up in the late morning and notice that I can't move. I look up and there are these 2 beings in my room talking to each other in this strange form of language, doing things like clicking and using solid tones. They notice that I'm awake and one of them slowly comes over to me on my bed and says to me, "If you would like, we can show you your past, present, and future." Except it didn't say it out loud like in words. It forced this sentence into my mind and I could hear it without hearing it. I know it sounds very vague, but it's the only way I can describe it. Basically, it was like a really loud thought. I still have no idea what it really meant by saying that, but I look back at this thing and barely am able to shake my head and let out a very weak and scared, "No thank you." And they both leave my room and I never have had another experience like that again. Still not convinced it wasn't just a wild hallucination, but definitely a weird and interesting experience nonetheless, especially with how it hasn't ever happened to me since. Makes me wonder what could have happened if I'd said yes to the thing instead of no thank you. Either way, I tend to keep this story to myself as I completely understand how it sounds and would admittedly have trouble believing it if someone else told me the same story. See, I'm willing to believe that stuff like this is possible, but something that I'd really like to know is that why does it just happen to seemingly random people at random times and not just happening to everybody? I accidentally started a small race fight at ASU by puking off a balcony onto a group of black guys. I was 20, and I was tutoring some of the football guys there, some of whom were actually brilliant, and some of who were total goons, but good-hearted people all around. I just had a birthday the night before, and since my 3 students who lived on campus had all passed the tests I had been preparing them for, we celebrated. Little did I know what celebrating was to these freaks of nature. These guys could put down an entire handle of hard liquor easily, and I was absolutely no match for their drinking games. I'm a slim guy now, but then I was freakishly thin, like 129 pounds soaking wet, so the liquor was waging a war of attrition with my delicate Jewish insides after about the 7th shot. These frat guys had kind of adopted me as a surrogate member. They even gave me the nickname Matty the Mouse because of my being the smallest dude there. 4 or so hours in, I get challenged to chugging Everclear, which for those of you who don't know is one of the strongest liquors available in the United States, or at least it was at the time, and I made it for about 2 seconds before I leaned over the balcony and puked. Like violently, on a group of black guys underneath. They rushed up the stairs and were asking for Red, which was the unofficial group leader guy, and that I be handed over to fight them. I'm a pacifist and a gentle soul, and my football buddies knew it. They weren't going to hand me over. The black guys left swearing they'd be back. They were. About an hour later, like 7 dudes pull up and start threatening to fight their way to me. I found out later I'd vomited onto one of their cell phones, mid-call, and gotten some of my vomit into his mouthpiece on his phone, and directly into his actual mouth. Everyone started getting puffy-chested and screaming, and after about 3 minutes of blustering, everyone sort of calmed down when one of my buddies bust out a joint and offered it to them as an olive branch. They accepted, and I apologized over and over, as none of it was done in malice. My friends still tell this story to this day to people I introduce them to. Freaking jerks. You know, the story is a little bit relatable of just being a super skinny guy that only weighs 129 pounds. Although I've never tasted alcohol, and I'd probably throw up pretty easily if I ever tried it. Okay, buckle up, this is the story of the worst day of my life. So my boyfriend's dog ate 1.5 pounds of chocolate rum balls our house guests had purchased and left in their room while we went out for breakfast. We came home to find a very drunken, very sick corgi, and more poop and vomit than a dog that size should ever be able to produce. Meanwhile, I realized that the smell isn't all just from the dog. You see, it'd been raining very hard for days, and turns out the lift situation in our community is ancient, and the motor died. I live at the lowest point in the community. Buckets of sewage water backed up out of both toilets and spilled into our home. So there are our horrified guests, profusely apologizing and gagging, and my boyfriend had to leave so he could get little drunky McChocoholic's stomach pumped. So there I was, 2 bathrooms full of human waste, and living room full of dog crap and vomit. I cleaned it all up alone. I threw out the clothes I was wearing and took a 2-hour shower that night. It was the most disgusting mess I've ever seen in my life. I had to light so many candles. I went through more bottles of bleach than a hospital custodian. But wait, there's more. The boyfriend comes home. Dog is gonna be okay, thankfully. The vet kept her overnight to observe her and allow her to sober up, but she was fine. I call our HOA and they promise to have someone come figure out a solution to the sewage pump problem. That night I settle in for bed and fall fast asleep, just happy that the day was over. Around 6 a.m. I'm suddenly jarred awake by the sound of an incredibly wet fart followed by a putrid smell. I slowly become aware that there is now a puddle of diarrhea less than 6 inches from my face. Turns out my chihuahua, whom occasionally has bout of stomach issues, had crawled into my bed and then proceeded to get sick right next to my face. My boyfriend had already left for work, so I cleaned up the mess, cursing my incredibly bad luck and then walking into the bathroom to shower only to find the toilets had backed up again. Yeah, okay, that sounds like a pretty crappy day. For 1 week, when I got the flu, my farts would whistle no matter what position I was in. My dog kept thinking I was calling him. Well, now it's time for me to tell my story that nobody would believe if I didn't have video proof right now. So last Friday I mentioned that I've got a big surprise happening this weekend, and I wasn't really expecting it, but I actually became surprised myself. So let me just show you a couple things. So this first thing isn't all that new, but last October, I bought myself a custom Kiesel 7-string headless guitar. And while playing guitar has been a lot of fun, the other instrument I've been really into is the drums. So last week I ordered myself an electronic drum kit. So this is what got delivered over the weekend. This is what I was all excited for. But this is where it gets really weird. So I ordered this like a week before Saturday, and then it got delivered the following Friday. But then today, on Sunday, something else happened. So I just happened to look out on my front porch today, and it looks like they sent me another one. So yeah, I ordered one drum set and they sent me two. So now I need to figure out what I'm gonna do about this. I mean, I think we've all had weird mishaps when ordering something. Maybe they send you two of something, or maybe they send you the wrong thing. But I can't say I was expecting them to just accidentally send me another $2,000 drum set. So we'll see what happens this week.